You know what? I'm about to say it.
Say it.
I don't say the N-word.
What?
The N-word is just a word.
Where's the cup?
It's coconut in the cup.
Did I say you can stop working? You monkey!
Tenfold gamers, we got a cold black. I repeat, there's a Porsche Primate plane.
Wait, how you even know I black?
Negro, please. By how you breathe, I could tell you's a moon cricket.
Now you see, that's racist and ableist. Cause I actually have asthma.
Listen here, boy. Why don't you go play some 2K or GTA? This here might be out of your league.
Sir, this is Mario Kart.
This ever happened to you? Well, you may be entitled to
some copium. Cause racism is to gaming what Yoko Ono was to John Lennon. My big envy them women them and man them, listen here. For many folk them of the palm persuasion, racism is limited to obvious incidents, such as the litany of gamer words littered throughout the intro of this video.
The gamer words. They call them gamer words, my nigga, like.
But what if I told you that it's a system? From Halo 2, online lobbies, where I would get called different slurs in different languages, to the very game mechanics and design. Like, look at this mask. Like, seriously, look at the mask, lip and nose.
What have I got? They did not just go ooga booga and then start playing African polyrhythms.
Y'all really had my arsey playing Nintendo 64. Your buttermilk, what was supposed to be a reprieve from the soul-crushing nature of capitalism, the rapture that is white supremacy. Instead of gaming being a migration from the mundanity of modern life, it was an extension for we people who are darker than blue, or even a part 2 of the misogyny that women and femdom face in the workplace, and a constant erasure or even existential dread for the queer folk them who, if lucky enough to find themselves in these games, they won't make it to the third cutscene due to the bury a gays trope.
Farewell, my prince.
Well, he doesn't even get a kiss goodbye though.
I would never go after the most marginalized class in the world, gamers, without some nuance, which is what I found in droves when researching this video. Whether it be the black oasis of the fighting game community.
Fighting games are black.
Very black.
Like if you look at the top fighting game players from America, they're all black. I am a semi-pro Tekken player. I played pros. Enabled my ass. I ain't gonna lie.
Or the enabling of my disabled folk them to engage with their reality in ways that society forbade.
I think of the disabled folk them like folks that like can't get out into a lot of physical spaces because they're literally marginalized to the point like where architecture is preventing them from getting into spaces.
You know, when we think about like how ableist like a lot of these gaming spaces are, right? I remember going to like one of these esports tournaments and it's a beautiful facility. The first question I said, I was like, if we had one of our players and our athletes that was in a wheelchair, how would they get to this stage? And nobody had like even considered that. I'm like, do we have enough ramps? You know, do we have access, you know, to get like to these spaces? And they didn't even think about that.
And even how gaming allows for folks with gender dysphoria to find themselves through their avatar.
I think gaming has really been that beautiful space that has allowed people to really be who they are. I had an article, in the Journal of Lesbian Studies that talked about how like Black queer folks and Black trans folks, you know, they aren't able to be out in their lives. You know, they had to, you know, they were misgendered in their physical world, but like in the gaming space, they could tell people who they are and then people respect them for that. You know, you can kind of create whatever identity you want. And if it's more aligned with like who you are, people can do that inside the gaming space. In text-based chat or voice-based communities, you know, we have found, you know, these different spaces of like protection, you know, for our own identities. I remember having like this conversation, you know, with this one, you know, trans girl, you know, and she was talking, she was like, you know, I can't tell my family about any of this, you know, but like in gaming, I'm able to do and be, you know, the fullness of who I am inside this space. And I thought that was like really dope. In workplaces and in school, you know, we have to hide those aspects of ourselves.
Which is why in today's episode of Everything is Racist, no, I'm not being facetious, literally everything, I want to investigate why Despite the good of gaming, is it a matrix for becoming a bigot? Is it a chicken or the egg insofar as the games themselves exacerbating the existing proclivities of the cishet white man them, or do they corrupt the communities themselves?
People make memes about like the Modern Warfare 2 lobbies and stuff, but like it was like a very real thing.
Okay, old school Call of Duty lobbies rivals the clan and how racist that is. Okay, you got some 12-year-old white boy with a high-pitched voice. We called them squeakers, and they would use the hard R every 15 seconds.
In public lobbies, I experienced just a lot of like, I guess it would be qualified as like edgy humor.
They get trash at the game, then they get racist. Hey, you cousin your cousin.
And it was all just kind of like accepted at that point.
Any fellow racists in this lobby?
Yeah.
You know it, man.
The fact that it's hypothetic, there's no victim of the crime.
It's all like edgy humor. There's no difference.
All epicenter events like Gamergate was the of the internet, in how it irrevocably changed IRL and URL interpersonal relationships and discourse themselves.
August of 2014, Depression Quest game dev Zoe Quinn receives violent harassment after the game's release. Ex-boyfriend Iran Yorni creates a false narrative that Quinn is sleeping with game journalists for good reviews of the game. There is no evidence of this. The journalist never even reviewed the game in any formal capacity. 4chan gets involved, making more and more violent threats against Quinn under false pretenses. Adam Baldwin creates the hashtag Gamergate. Gamergaters then move to harassing any woman in gaming journalism like Arnita Sarkeesian. This includes a mass shooting threat that caused her to have to cancel events. Gamergate supporters decide that anyone who can be considered an SJW to be an immediate threat to gaming. Feminist Triggered and SJW Getting Owned compilations on YouTube boom into the hundreds of millions of views. Young boys watch these and then become radicalized by the alt-right propaganda.
And the compartmentalization necessary for marginalized folks to be in community with those who deny their own humanity.
Growing up in the late 90s was a weird time to get into gaming as a Black woman in America, especially in the Deep South. I was getting picked on in middle school for having a Sonic Adventure and Sonic Advance guidebook with me, reading that stuff. I was the only chocolate chip in the whole cookie, the only chocolate chip. And I still tried to fit in, but I could still feel I was being othered. And this time it was not just because of my hobbies. Something else was, a little different. When you are put in a position of, I really, really want to fit in and I'll do anything to fit in, you find yourself in less than desirable places.
The sky is blue. The grass is a delightful shade of green. Leaves are falling from the sky in autumn, depending on where in the world you are. And as nature demands, the gaming industry is as racist as hell. You don't need little old me to tell you that, do you?
Dance, little monkey, dance!
As a matter of fact, you don't have to delve too deep in the internet to expose the amalgamation of isms within gaming and inherently biased developers, marketers, and those who purchase, play, and form the basis of the consumer base.
The middle class back then, I mean, even more than it is now, was very, very white. Gaming was kind of a luxury item even back then, and almost exclusively bought and played in white suburbia. This was 20, 30 years after the whole white flight thing, I think.
This is a residential street in southwest Atlanta. Not long ago, all the persons who lived here were white. But recently, a few Negro families moved in, and a scene too familiar in other areas of Atlanta was repeated.
We have to talk about things like white flight, right? That suburban context that you're talking about is white flight.
The white residents started moving out. For sale signs went up. The street became what is known as transitional. That stage when Negroes are moving in and white people are leaving.
Back in the day, we were all on farms and industrialization happened. Then we went to cities, started working in factories, and white folks were in those spaces too. But when Black folks, especially with in the United States context, when the migration from the South to the North happened, and from rural areas to urban areas happened, white folks was like, we don't want to be around these niggas.
Soon this street may be resegregated, all grow. The Atlanta Planning Department has warned that if this trend continues, It's just a matter of time until Atlanta will become an island of Negroes surrounded by a sea of white suburbanites.
We talk about white flight just like we talk about like gentrification, policies that impacted that, the government programs that enabled, those things to happen, even also stripped away the like black growth, black mobility, like to really like, develop like this, like a strong black middle class. Like what was happening was white folks also took their money, they took their businesses, they took their companies. That moved to suburbanization, white folks really had like this individualistic like mindset also. And we see that in a lot of things. So we see that in conversations like around like competition, that they're a very individual like mindset. And you see that kind of reflected like in black folks. But to me, and for a lot of folks, a lot of scholars that write about this, that's like a settler colonial like mindset. That's like white supremacist like mindset,
Suburbia specifically contributes a lot to, I think, how the gaming community was fostered. As a kid growing up in suburbia, you will at best have one or two friends that are close enough to walk to. Most of your contact with the outside world is through these consoles. And again, these consoles are also primarily composed of other middle-class, like, young white men.
That isolated suburban experience is not too typical for black folks. Like, that edgelord identity isn't allowed for black children because, like, our elders would be like, nah, don't do that. Somebody come and get us out of that. You know what I'm saying? We're not going to be allowed to go down that route too early. We're going to take you to church.
It adopts a lot of their tendencies. I mean, I'm one of them. I think what that does, what suburbia does alongside that, it turns like racism and any sort of like bigotry like
hypothetical.
Yes! Racism for them is a bonding practice. In their heads, they're not being racist. It's just, we like to say and make fried chicken and watermelon jokes. We don't hate black people. And then you get a black person in there and they're calling you and making chicken and watermelon jokes. And you're like, hey, can you stop? And they're like, what? We're just joking. I'm like
when you are not exposed to other like races, other cultures, other struggles to a kid like that, it's basically the same as like a curse word. We're like, you're not supposed to say this. And then you say it, and then that's the funny part.
At its rawest, the gaming industry casually reinforces Eurocentric whitewashed historical beauty standards through character customization and designs. While it can be a breeding ground for Nazis and other nationalists to fantasize about alternative timelines and to harass players within marginalized communities.
It sounds like you think the end game is that whites should become a minority.
I guess I just don't understand how you think that being white is such an important part of being an American.
It's a principle. Why is it bad that they remain a majority then?
I've already said why, because you're talking about restricting immigration from a ton of different areas in order to
ensure. Why not? Why do we have to take immigration from all these areas?
Because it helps grow the size of the economy and it brings talent in from other areas to continue to benefit the entire country.
It benefits the global elites. That's the only people it benefits. Let's just say that we admit a Mexican immigrant to the country. But if swaths of illegal immigrants pour across the border, we can't do anything about it under pain of being called racists. When that Mexican immigrant steps into America and sees that nothing's changed because the Mexicans have brought their Mexican culture with them, he says, what the heck?
For many, however, games are a method of igniting their interest in history, achieve creative, self-imposed goals, and experiment with gender away from prying, bigoted eyes.
I am a lifelong gamer. I grew up in rural Kentucky. Some people see that kind of gaming as very isolated. You're on your own. We were very communal, in our gaming, from jump.
Just the general communal nature of black people. If you live in a city, you got cousins all over that city. You probably got cousins whose house you can walk to. We're all collectively organizing to raise and take care of families.
We have communal lives. We think about even our households. It's intergenerational. When my mama got sick, my mom moved in with me. I'm like, that's just kind of how we live.
This always confused me watching Home Alone, and they would see their cousins and it would seem like an event. It would be like a special occasion to see grandma. And it's like, I see my grandmother every weekend.
We have friends that came over. I had a homie that had the Nintendo 64. I had the Sega. Somebody had the Dreamcast. Somebody else had the GameCube, because, we couldn't have them all. So we coordinated our efforts, to make sure that at least the whole neighborhood had at least all those consoles.
A lot of the Call of Duty, definitely Madden and 2K, and these are communal games.
It's no wonder wonder that that's also reflected in our gaming practices too, of like, we're not going to just be gaming by ourselves. We're going to be gaming with everybody.
I think the way Black people engage with gaming reflects the way Black people have engaged with community.
Gaming always feels like isolated to me.
I'll never forget, I had one white friend, he had games I had never, what is Final Fantasy? You have brothers, why do you have so many one-player games? I'll be so, this shit was dope. I was like, this looks really cool. When is my turn to play? The way suburbs work for white people is this is my place. This is my household.
It's like fascinating then to see them in like the esports space. That's them trying to practice being communal. They are still very like isolated and alone and individualistic. They ain't got it, and that's okay. Those kids on those esports teams, they would much rather prefer, to be in their rooms gaming. I'm like, just leave them in their rooms. Their anxieties is high. They stressed out. Everybody watching and look like, don't make them do that.
But far too often, it is a form for anonymous, friendly banter or edgy speak, which is caucus for, casual racism. With most things, problematic behavior is enabled, stemming from developers who deliberately craft narratives in unspecified Caribbean paradises with NPCs who are caricatured stereotypes requiring rescue by the incredibly morally upstanding white saviors.
There's a game called Assassin's Creed Black Flag, where they are in the Caribbean, and man, let me tell you, like they really did us dirty.
How you feel about that?
When it comes to Caribbean representation, we're either all weed smoking, gun toting Jamaicans, which I'm not, I'm from the Bahamas, but you think Shark Tale, you think things like even Belly, like black films like Belly, or you even think like GTA, like if you want to get to the games, like GTA has Lil Jacob, and he's like this Caribbean mystical Negro that's just violent and a crime lord and all that shit. And like when you think about like what positive or what like nuanced representation of Caribbean culture do you get in anything? There's not many places where I can point to and I'm like, oh, okay, that's me.
It's a caricature.
Exactly. There's a travesty of me. It's a parody of me. It's a shadow.
Oh, Sebastian!
And then you got the prominent figures in these communities like PewDiePie, JonTron, XQC. When he's not stealing everybody's content.
I'm gonna give it a buck. I'm gonna give it a buck. I could take my daily check and buy your entire bloodline.
Who also contribute their propagation of certain narratives and normalization of certain behaviors as well as attitudes. PewDiePie, JonTron, and XQC have all been caught using anti-black slurs in front of a very impressionable young audience, as Felix actually claims, an army of 9-year-olds. And they still, unfortunately, enjoy lingering online acclaim. For you all who expecting a segment on Video Game Donkey, given that, I use him as a censor anytime I say the word, then you are, because Video Game Donkey is obviously a black old woman.
To be real with you, I don't know how you accidentally say that. There's been no situation where I'm angry at a game and I'm just like, I want to say a slur right now, or just I say it without even thinking. When you do something without thinking, it's because you're used to doing it. There's a clip like months later after the whole controversy where he almost says it again in a Fortnite game. Him saying that caused people to look back at his former stuff, and then it turns out he made like a lot of Nazi jokes, like an uncomfortable amount of them. Like he also just had I don't think it was a Nazi uniform, but it was him pretending to be a Nazi for a short clip, similar to the Anita Sarkeesian thing. It went from like analyzing gaming as a whole to like the specific people most famous for it, and it again had this massive defensive response because like PewDiePie was millions of people's childhoods. So like it again felt like another like big personal attack on them.
The common thread between these instances is a gaming industry saturated predominantly by white people who too often exhibit a far inflated sense of importance than deserved. With their newfound power, they are provoked by the inclusion of any demographic outside the narrow focus on able-bodied cishet white mandem. And of course, late-stage capitalism further exacerbates this by naturally rewarding negative behavior, as the system inherently requires discrimination to thrive.
I'm trying not to drop names on purpose because I don't want this to come back to either of us. I knew this guy. He sees something in me that kind of affirms the otherness that I had been going through for a bit. So we kind of cling to that attention. I'm in his Discord, and it's like, okay, he streams, it's whatever, it's cool. And in trying to fit in so much, I miss microaggressions. I miss slamming women that are half my size for being too fat. And when you're in a dark place already and you're just trying to fit in, it's easy to let those things slide. Because again, when I grew up playing video games, it's easier to cling on to someone that's like, they see me, they want to be around me, and I'll tolerate this just to be around them.
The pathetic threat of boycotts and protests by fragile white racist gamers always work, which adds to why they feel so deeply emboldened to continue perpetuating racial hegemony and supremacy within games. Let's look a bit deeper though. Reactionaries love outrage, which is why racists collectively lost their damn mind when Miles Morales was introduced as the new Spider-Man. Just wait until they realize that Gwen Stacy is a bisexual trans icon. The character, design, and developers face constant criticism, reflecting the resistance to further diversifying the superhero video game landscape from the moment Miles Retro Ones left a footprint on the side of the Empire State Building. You don't believe me? Well, thankfully, we have the brilliant Shakespearean rambles of a GameSpot reviewer who remarked that Miles was a hero with the exaggerated swagger of a black teen. Whatever that means, man. The uproar surrounding the surprisingly great portrayal highlights the ongoing struggle for inclusivity and representation in the gaming industry. And luckily, the majority of consumers genuinely enjoyed the game, and it's since received so much acclaim that games with similar mechanics and physics are always compared to Miles Morales' Spider-Man. But I can't get that verbiage out my head. It's not overtly racist in its use of slurs, and in fact, I actually would prefer that Miles Morales swings differently than Peter Parker. But what makes it seem more threatening is its proper grammar and stellar vocabulary, all of which are used to politely dehumanize and other black men.
Now, for me, I like seeing the visibility of like black folks like in those kinds of spaces, but I'm also not one that's like influenced by those to think that that's the only narrative of blackness. You know, that's just like a singular vision of like blackness. Like,
why is the term swagger being associated specifically with black characters? You never hear anybody talking about the swagger of...
The exaggerated swag comment gets more hate than it deserves. I love that Miles Morales moves completely different than the other one. Somebody in there had to say, hey, I feel like Miles Morales would swing differently than Peter Parker.
You know, we got black uncles as criminals. They went to jail before, but that's not the only story of like blackness, but that's the only thing that we get. You know, it's like this singular narrative. It's a limited vision of like black lives. And I think that's the danger, especially for a lot of white audiences who don't want to see black folks outside of that.
I love the attempt at black hair.
I would never say that, you know, I hate these stereotypical representations. I just want to see more. You know, when you give us like the uncle that's the pimp, okay, we know the uncle that's a pimp, give us some more. And we have an uncle that's a drug dealer, okay, but give us more, you know, and then they stop right there and think that they have, you know, captured the essence of blackness.
That also gets the absence of black people in the room when the games are being made. There's not enough black people in the room, so when our stories and our depictions are there, it's very shallow, very one-dimensional.
This bias is exemplified in games like Grand Theft Auto Vice City, where the character modeled after Ray Liotta and Tom Vassetti walks upright, while Franklin, the black character, has a distinctive swaggerific gait with a bop in his step that looks like he just dropped a hot pound of mess in his drawers.
Like, gaming's an expensive hobby to get into. They used to be like kind of more accessible, similar to how movies were with like arcades. But then once like home consoles started getting popular, there was like a big money like barrier to enter the hobby. Consoles cost around the same when adjusted for inflation, but like games, they're $60 now, like big releases, but they were $60 back in the mid 1980s too. If you bought like Aladdin for the NES, that was like the equivalent of $130 now.
But I want to be clear that despite the downsides, gaming has continuously provided solace to communities like my disabled folk them aforementioned, who have been marginalized by the embedded capitalistic societal structure that prevents them from fully engaging with the world and even themselves. Or games like VR Chat, IMVU, for your veterans out there who actually know about what I'm talking about. And most recently, Roblox have proven to be suitable meeting grounds for wanting alternatives. I ain't gonna lie. I mean, when Roblox isn't literally trying to recreate some of the most heinous happenings in the last few centuries or grooming children.
Let me get a rate right quick, bro. Where you going, man? Yo!
Unhand me right now.
Let me see some right quick, man. What's good, man?
Unhand me.
What's good, man? I used to hang monkeys like you, man. I used to hang monkeys like you, man.
Get back to work! I said get back to work, blood! Get back to work! Did I say you could stop working? You monkey!
Virtual reality allows people to live vicariously through their carefully curated skins that may even come with abilities and emotes like on Fortnite or VR Chat. Modified hardware means that they can be freely customized with inclusive software, like sound cues or choosing the avatar's voice, giving young, curious femmes the chance to experiment with things that they are typically gendered out of or feel unsafe to in our current society. A 2006 study analyzed the social interactions of adolescents on the autism spectrum, or those with ASD, autism spectrum disorder, whilst playing a massive multiplayer online role-playing game, to review the ways in which virtual reality could assist in forming meaningful relationships for those struggling to physically socialize. Researchers concluded that the preconceived notion of gaming didn't stop those with ASD from effectively communicating. In fact, the universal proliferation of technology and boom in MMOs have fostered a welcoming environment to show off skills, form friendships based on completing shared objectives, and a myriad of participatory interactions.
My parents told me that when I was a baby and they took me in for my checkup, the doctor diagnosed me more or less with autism because of the shape of my head, nothing else. But I was a low-verbal child. I had fewer milestones, and that could have been the abuse that I had under my birth mother. But as I've gotten older and I look at, especially autism and ADHD in women, I'm over here like, some of those things click. I get it. I'm probably right on the cusp of the spectrum, but you know what? I'm still me. But growing up where I did in the boonies of Mississippi, I didn't really have anyone else to talk to about video games. Because, one, if you can't tell by how I sound, I don't sound, to some people, black enough. And my parents insisted that I speak properly. I had a lot of white comments growing up, like, oh, you must think you white, oh, you must think you this. So in addition to already being black, I was being othered. And, just by the fact of I was a black female playing video games when all of the girls my age were playing dolls. The boys, they may have been playing video games, but I wasn't included because I was a girl. So it's a very othering experience when you grow up in a poor area because my parents weren't affluent. We were really just one missed paycheck from being, having our house foreclosed on.
Many are unaware of this, but at the start of the gaming craze of the 1980s, women and femmes constituted over 25% of the market, as the stereotype was that the arcades belonged to the boys, which relegated girl gamers to their homes to play Atari. This sneaky branding technique definitely cut off the developers' noses to spite their faces by not cultivating an inclusive environment that would bridge the gender gap, increase sales, and set the tone for the next 3 decades of gamer culture.
Gaming was kind of gender neutral before the game crash of 1983. Back then it was like Pong. Pong is not appealing to any specific gender. After everything kind of fell apart with a lot of bad games being made and PCs becoming more popular, Nintendo kind of revived the whole gaming industry in the US. While researching for how to market, they found that boys tended to play games more than girls did. Mm-hmm. And so they decided to shift their marketing to just specialize entirely in men, men and boys. Everything in gaming for basically decades was designed specifically with men in mind. I could definitely see how there is a lot of inherent misogyny in that. Even people working in the industry, it was almost entirely just like, you know, white dudes. The white dudes in the rooms making those games, like, they probably weren't trying to do anything bad necessarily. They just literally didn't know what they were doing in regards to that.
And amidst the pervasive high aroma of Axe body spray, there was a silver lining. As usual, women play a pivotal role in the marketing enhancement, constituting approximately 48% of the United States. The Gamergate episode was marked by an uptick in disturbing incidents, such as death, the R-word, doxing, and assault threats over titles with plots that deviate from the white cis-hetero narrative. But that didn't deter women from buying in mass and supporting creators.
The Gamergate era cannot be understudied.
It was the first time people felt large-scale, like a quote-unquote attack on their isolated environment.
The Gamergate era is, to me, a canon event.
Gamergate. Anita Sarkeesian. She made this thing basically criticizing gaming culture, which was unheard of at that time. At least with that scale and visibility. Probably some black femmes and whatnot was talking about that shit from time.
It's all right. We'll give Anita her little flowers.
That is the moment where all of these hypothetically racist, young white, socially disaffected men organized in a way that they didn't even know was possible. And once they did, it changed the world. The way the internet works today is shaped by Gamergate. The way our politics work today is shaped by Gamergate.
With racists and other gamers who enjoy the various isms that are rightfully being seen now as immoral and primitive in the modern age, what they fail to comprehend is that the presence of other groups pumps the industry with fresh stories and promises continued improvement to the technological options like refresh rate and texture patches. With that statistic in mind, how much should we praise conglomerates worth billions of dollars for doing the absolute minimum to appease such a diverse audience? By bowing to the whims of white mediocrity, white men remain the face of the industry to be the designated saviors in every lobby and campaign.
The real impact of Gamergate was congealing the alt-right, anti-woke identity into a thing, and how that has manifested in everything from Donald Trump to Andrew Tate to Twitter, to Twitter trolls, one-issue voters, 4chan, anti-vaxxers, like all of that, to me, starts with Gamergate.
Once again, using Far Cry's compelling villains and their iconography and immersive, engaging gameplay, the fifth game in the series was originally expected to battle a violent white supremacist cult in the Montana area. As per usual, cue the fragile white racist tantrums with the works. And by the works, I'm talking about kicking, screaming, tweets, sweaty Reddit posts at 3 a.m. and threats of boycotts for good measure. This unsurprisingly led to the developers toning down the racist elements of the antagonists by introducing a few black men as villains within a far-right Christian cult in Montana. And I think it's worth noting that the inclusion of these black characters in this context surpassed the actual demographic makeup of Montana's population.
I've had my moments of trolling America Online chat rooms and shit, right? So, like, I get it. When I left the house, there was shame attached to that behavior. When I cut off the screen, there was shame attached to that behavior. Now you do that and then you show your friends. Now you do that and then you brag about it on Twitter or 4chan. Look at this awful thing I did to somebody that I'll never face consequences for. And when that happened, there was a loss of access to functionally engage with a whole portion of people. The lasting impact of Gamergate is like up there with wars and COVID. Gamergate is up there, and I don't think people fully appreciate that.
Through our handy-dandy Wayback Machine, I found screenshots of the since-deleted campaign, featuring a few troubling articles downplaying its asininity and a reply saved by the alleged original poster from the Change.org petition.
It's time to draw a line in the sand. We, the American gamers, that make up the majority of your user base, demand to you cancel this game, or alter it to be less offensive to your main player base. In these times, you must understand that there might be some violent repercussions if you intend to follow through with your pointless criticism.
However, the fact that the developers ultimately adjusted the idea implies that the protests had a tangible impact, which is very disappointing and ironic given that the use of such a setting casually omits the approximately 7% Native American population, therefore raising questions about the game's realism and inclusivity.
Did Gamergate do justice for black women and femmes in particular, and black gamers?
One of the first stories that have to be told around it, white women who were impacted by the effects of Gamergate, they did not want women of color coming and disrupting the conversations. Black women were trying to talk about oh, it's a lot going on, y'all. You know, Mike Brown was just killed. You know, they killed Tamir Rice, and and also with Gamergate, we're all experiencing a lot. Black woman comment. White women responded and said, this is not a space for Black Lives Matter. Because in their mind, they saw it as okay, Black Lives Matter, that's black men being killed. Because they completely because the misogynoir of it all, they ignored and didn't realize how, black women, black femmes, black trans folks were impacted too. We just didn't talk about their stories. But then they were this is a white woman's issue. They really saw themselves as the pinnacle of the ones who were experiencing the harassment. Black women were no, y'all's is just more visible. We have been dealing historically with this since games went online. And we can even talk even more historically because we also deal with it in the real world. There's protectionism for you, white lady. There is this protection around white womanhood that has always been there. And it's enacted, to ensure that you're protected. Black women have not been extended that, right? White women have violated the rules of whiteness, excuse me, because basically they were calling out white men. They were calling out the structures that white men had created. They're doing videos about how sexist things are. And then, they weren't aligned along the lines of whiteness. So I feel that this was some punishment, of hey, we gotta teach them their lesson. We gotta show them that, they have to rally around white men. We're the leaders. We're the ones on top of this totem pole. And if they don't get in line, we're going to harass them. Later, what we actually found out was that Gamergate, it was not that big. They were using bots. They were maximizing, the capacities of the platforms and the technological tools to make it seem like it was larger than it actually was. And that's really the story and the lesson that went into the alt-right, that went into the rise of Trump, that kind of went into the misinformation, fake news kind of things that led, to the rise that, hey, we don't need a critical mass, to sustain a social movement. We just need a dedicated few and these technological tools, and we can make it seem like it's more dramatic than what it actually is.
Far Cry 3. And let me just pause there to say that the game is absolutely exceptional. I mean, there's no denying that it single-handedly changed the industry. The very way that players view antagonists and the very formula used by the designers to create antagonists to this day portrayed the iconic Mohawk villain, Vaz, and his sister as magical Negroes and menacing gang leaders. But content within games like FC3 can inadvertently perpetuate racist attitudes. Players assume the identity of the white male protagonist who was attacked and subsequently kidnapped by pirates after going on vacation with friends. The narrative unfolds using the familiar white savior trope where he emancipates himself and systematically eliminates his captors to rescue his buddies. The problematic element emerges when the protagonist seeks knowledge and tools from the very stereotypical, whimsical, wise, magical Negro, who bestows him with a tribal tattoo, a move that not only reinforces racial stereotypes, but also imbues the white character with increased stats, perpetuating harmful tropes that blackness is synonymous with improved strength and a higher pain tolerance.
Did you play The Last of Us?
I saw the film on it.
You should go back and play. Well, no, you don't have to. So I was bothered It's a really beautiful narrative. The first one follows Joel. You have like this father figure narrative, you know, a lot of protection, a lot of things like that. So it's really like, it's got a cute little storyline. But in the second one, we follow Ellie. And Ellie is Joel's daughter. She's trying to like avenge his death, and she goes on this death path. Like, she's just killing everybody. She approaches somebody named Nora, black woman. Nora is a part of like the resistance. Nora and Ellie, they fall down into the basement. There's a hole in the floor. They fall down to the basement and the zombie spores are there. So Ellie is immune, and the Fireflies wanted to basically use her blood to try to create like an antigen and like, you know, a vaccine to kind of cure everybody. Joel was like, no, not my daughter. I'm not having it. And so the world was like, no, she could really save all of us. We just got to sacrifice her. So it's kind of like one of those morality stories where, you know, kind of makes you think deeply about what's the right thing to do. So, you know, like, I get that. But anyway, Ellie starts killing everybody though. I'm like, if we don't kill this bitch and just end this shit, you know, that's what I'm on. But we fall down into where the spores are, you know. So Nora, black woman, you know, she's impacted because she's not immune. They've been working for a cure. So she, you know, she's about to turn into like a zombie. I'm thinking that Ellie, white girl, is just gonna walk off, you know, because we're gonna die anyway. She sits there and starts hacking and slashing. But that's not the most offending part. It puts the gamer in control of it. Basically, on the screen, it says, press X / press square. So the mechanics of the game really has us engaging like in torture. The torture like of this black woman. And to me, it's like insult to injury because she was already getting ready to die. Why did we have to do like this added? It was anti-black as I thought it was racist as hell. I stopped playing the game. I ain't playing this game no more.
It perpetuates like this idea of, yet again, the same type of subjugation and torture of the Atlantic slave trade and everything like that. Or even like when you get into how the perception of like black maternal mortality, and the reason being a lot of the times, like the research shows that like white doctors and white surgeons, they don't empathize with black pain. Like when a black woman, a femme, is trying to go and tell them and say, hey, I don't feel right, or like I feel pain, I need more of this, I need more of that.
The pervasive racism within the gaming community makes for a hostile environment that people of color, particularly in FPS games like Call of Duty, find challenging to navigate. For those unfamiliar, interactive lobbies and the open voice chat were established to facilitate communication and tactical decisions among gamers. But what you'll actually get are screaming white boys calling literally anyone and everyone that minutely offends or responds to them the gamer word, which is the N word.
As gaming got more accessible, like other people were more easily able to access it. Behavior was so reinforced of just like, we're just joking around, we're saying a bunch of edgy stuff, that once people confronted them about that, it felt like an attack on them, if that makes any sense. It's like, I've been doing this forever, and then no one had an issue with it. So now, like,
you're coming from my culture.
Yeah, they're victimized. They feel victimized. And then what happens is that the people that they're friends with that also are fine with this behavior kind of reinforce that. And like it gets polarized, further and further polarized. The thing that matters most in that interaction where you're being confronted is the fact that this person is like confronting you. Everyone you know, this behavior is fine around. And so like, you start building a negative association with anyone who is trying to tell you this is wrong. You're almost getting like shoved more and more into this corner of people that are all fine with this. There's a concept called group polarization, which is like when a group feels attacked, your beliefs as a group will become more and more extreme, like more and more polarized. People say they play games to escape from reality. Sometimes it really feels like I need to escape from the idea that there are people that are worse off than me. They want to live in that time where they didn't have to think about any of this. When like a game has themes of like modern day stuff, it becomes like a whole thing where like their reality is being shattered, or like their escape is being shattered.
For those who happen to have an intersectional identity beyond able-bodied cis-hetero whiteness, the voice chat can include insensitive depictions, harmful stereotypes, and in the most alarming instances, harassment campaigns reminiscent to Gamergate. To this end, Dr. Kashona Gray examines the issues within the gaming industry by stating, marginalizing practices in game culture have become more widely publicized and understood in recent years, most notably because of high-profile incidents of harassment. However, Representations of women and racial or ethnic minorities by the gaming industry have also been problematic, historically. For example, since the 1980s, video games have been critiqued for the hypersexualization of women, and women are often the victims of misogynistic vitriol, as the incidents around Gamergate have exposed. People of color are featured in largely stereotypical ways and are all but absent from the gaming industry.
So white children, racism is a bonding practice. The same way that misogyny is a bonding practice for men, we have been taught to not think that that's a real thing. A guy like me wouldn't do that. This guy beat up, did some awful, what was wrong with him? What was she wearing? You know what I'm saying? What did you do to make him mad? Like, that's how, this is the same way racism works. And so the same ways in which I believe you tackle misogyny among men and things like that is the same way we got to tackle racism. The problem is we have to count on actual other white people to do it properly. That's Shaq at the free throw line.
Queer gamers and gamers with disabilities are almost entirely absent and, when present, are not depicted fairly. This differential treatment appears to have a symbolic relationship with the exclusion of marginalized players.
Gamergate is, in my mind, this extension of white feminism. Knowing historically white feminism's role in the institutions of white supremacy and how white femininity bolsters white supremacy in many cases, especially like when you look at people like Carrie Chapman, who was one of the biggest in the women's suffrage, but like basically when it was time to break bread, they were just like, hey, you know, you could enfranchise us white women, but them.
We don't fuck with them niggas.
We need someone to mow the lawn and shit.
People like think back and look at like the suffragettes and look at like the movements. You know, a lot of them, they like to do revisionist history. White women wanted the right to vote because they wanted to secure, you know, total domination of white supremacy. This is just like a continuation of those historical legacies of like, you know, white women want supreme domination and total domination, and they'll do it like by any means necessary. You know, I don't want to negate, you know, the things that they went through, especially with the Gamergate. It was really sad. It was really awful. You know, I really felt bad for like a lot of them, but they really said to us, you know, to like the Black women's community, they were like, you know, we don't need your help. This isn't your problem. This was like the same moment that happened like in the 70s, you know, when the feminism, you know, the feminist movement like was happening, and, you know, so many women were like, you know, we're tired of being at home. We want to go work. And, you know, Black and brown women were like, what y'all talking about? We working. And in fact, we need to add and update some of these demands. We want better working conditions. We want better wages. Like, we already working. Y'all can just get y'all asses up at the house. Ain't nobody keeping y'all in the house.
Gamergate, whatever its initial motivations may have been, and its offshoots, have evolved into an internet culture war stoked by the revolving door of cancel culture and outrage baiting by the right. On one side, independent game makers and critics, many of whom are women and femmes, have and continue to advocate for increased inclusion, while a motley alliance of vitriolic opponents comprised of misogynists, anti-feminists, trolls, individual convinced of manipulation by a left-leaning and or corrupt press, and traditionalists who resist any alterations to the established norms in gaming. The clash between these factions reflect broader debates surrounding representation and change. But as written in the Washington Post, the divide is, in part, demographic. It's the difference between the historical, stereotypical gamer, young, nerdy white guy who likes guns and boobs, and the much broader, more diverse range of people who play now. But all is not lost. Marginalized groups actively combat the status quo in the gaming world using mods, forums, and inclusive events with the sole aim to expose their requisite player base to new perspectives and call for representation.
Hypothetics Sims, it took a Black woman to create the mods for us to see ourselves. They were like, okay, you're not going to give us like black skins, we'll create it. You're not going to give us like the clothes that we might wear, okay, we'll create it.
As expected, Black, trans, and Black trans femme creators in particular are leading the change to develop mods that enhance realistic depictions of people of color, addressing concerns such as limited and stereotypical designs that liken Black Sims' hairstyle to a stalk of friggin' broccoli.
And they had like a bunch of like racist caricatures of fighters.
So first off, video games come from Japan, and I don't have to
sentence. Period.
They're racist against white people. The only place where anti-white racism exists is in Japan. Because if Japanese people depicted black people the way they depict white people, like you could just go to Tekken. Tekken has a Chuck Norris American flag waving loudmouth dude. They have a fat white guy. The way people consume blackness is through our media, and black media is over the top and bombastic. It should be just for an entertaining, dandy-esque element, but people be like, no, that's how niggas is. Yeah, the hair, the suits, the big old lips, that's all that. Every black fighting game character was a break dancer or played basketball. One thing I think people don't realize that even I still struggle with as I'm making content that is consumed by a lot of white people is that large chunks of white people literally know no niggas, have never seen black people in real life, have no direct contact with us. And their only contact is through media. Now their only interaction with blackness is Lil Jacob, is CJ from GTA, what was that, 3? Then you start getting into some Fanon Afro-pessimism shit where we stop being human and we start being avatars for them to consume life and blackness as a commodity.
It's like people can just take like a cyber tour of the ghetto. They can take a cyber tour of the barrio, ride through it a little bit, go in and they think they cool, they think they know it, but then they leave. There's never really like a real engagement with like who our cultures are. And there's no understanding of like how those conditions came to be. With Assassin's Creed, going like to the islands, we didn't talk about, how basically how the world did Haiti. Like how dare Haiti, get its freedom. We don't really talk about like the sanctions and the embargoes and basically how the world has collectively and globally have tried to starve Haiti because they still blame them for leaving their colonizer. Like, how dare you not want your colonizer to colonize you anymore? How dare you?
Black gamers have long since lamented about the default style options and character customization sequences that represent a narrow view of blackness. Christian Fagans, a 24-year-old gamer from Philadelphia who goes by the name Coco Games, began her Sims journey with The Sims 3 and considers herself both a storyteller and an artist. The Sims serves as a medium to express their emotions and apply the incredible design power of the 3D form in both character and setting creation. An artist's life isn't easy. Most notably, colorism and the unauthorized use of her creations highlights the ongoing struggles for inclusivity and respect within the Sims community. She recounted her experience as follows. If I upload a promo picture of my CC and it's a light-skinned Sim, I'm 100% going to get 200, 300, 400 likes. If I use a black or dark-skinned Sim on my promo picture, even in my thumbnails, this is where I really see it. It's not getting as much traction. It's really crazy how everything, all of the systemic stuff, is even down here in a video game. That's one of the things I hate so much because I'm like, I'm gonna use models that look like me. I'm dark. And then you'll see it doesn't get as many comments. Yes, oh my God, the model is so beautiful. But when I upload somebody who favors lighter skin, it's, oh my God, like, can I download the Sim? It's so sad.
Who was the one who told me that my weight equated my value? Because I was very healthy then, like a healthier weight. Like, yeah, I was overweight, but I was a healthier weight. And now, like, yeah, I got a lot of extra on me, but my blood work looks better than my husband's. I had to learn to love me. And for a lot of male gamers, especially because of male figures in their lives, it's harder to find what it really is to love yourself.
So, what can you do? What can we do? I love games, and I hear and see the outrage and fervent responses by those who enjoy playing, designing, and even watching games.
Because you allude to something I think is powerful. We're forced to empathize with whiteness through our media and consumption of media because we never see ourselves. Like, I grew up in Stand By Me and The Sandlot and The Simpsons and Growing Pains, all these shows with young adolescent white boys. I learned how to project my black ass onto these white boys. They don't know how to do that shit. My sons have no video games. Still, 2023, There are no games for them to play where they play little black boys. None. All the adventure and joy and fun in life is filtered through a white male perspective for everyone, let alone little black boys who are then have to kind of like, the best they get is they can make Minecraft Steve black.
Start off by supporting inclusive gamers, creators, and modders. Don't just consume their content, pay them fairly. Subscribe to their Patreon, like, and actually engage with their content so that the almighty algorithm can put it into others' feeds. All of that. It's a capitalist hellscape out there, and we've got to pay to play. But the sting of depleting some of your hard-earned wages can be soothed by ensuring that it actually goes to those who will use it to uplift others and support causes and opportunities for others. Make sure to try a diverse selection of games too. It's not forced diversity or pandering. It's just the real world you live in finally being reflected in the fictional worlds that we escape to, or at least try to. It's important to remember that we all exist in echo chambers that reinforce our preconceived notions of the world and is reflected in our realities as well as our research, in my case. I mean, for example, when I was researching Gamergate, I uncovered a story that I totally forgot about. When a man attacked Paul Pelosi, then Speaker Nancy Pelosi's husband. Apparently, the attacker was radicalized by Gamergate, according to Vice News, which is, as we should know, is an ostensibly left-leaning source. Thankfully, I was able to corroborate that with a more centrist source, despite me not liking it that much, that I wouldn't have even found had it not been for Ground News. Ground News is a website and app developed by a former NASA engineer on a mission to give readers an easy, data-driven, objective way to read the news. Every story comes with a quick visual breakdown of the political bias, factuality, and ownership of the sources reporting, all backed by ratings from 3 independent news monitoring organizations. Like look at this story on Gamergate. Right away, you can see that this story was reported on by 4 news outlets. And of these 4 outlets, they're all left, which makes sense given it discusses right-wing propaganda. But you could even see the story's factuality score and ownership of the outlets reporting on this story, which in this case is owned by Verizon. Best of all, you can even compare headlines to see how different outlets frame the story. For example, the Huffington Post leads with the right-wing propaganda buzzword, whereas PBS passes it a bit differently and less sensationally. Listen here, the blind spot feature alone is worth getting Ground News, because it can single-handedly burst your bubble or your echo chamber by exposing stories that are overrepresented by particular parts of the political spectrum. News outlets don't only inform us about occurrences across the world, they tell us what they believe is important for us to be informed about. So depending on the ownership of the source, you may be missing out on stories that are essential to your edification and even overdosing on op-eds that don't really matter. Go to groundnews.com to grab this 30% discount off the Vantage subscription that gives you unlimited access to all Ground News features. Click the link in the description to exit your echo chamber and give your head some edification with Ground News. And tap right there to get a playlist of vids just like this. You see, I did the work for you. You ain't even got to go searching, go up inside. Your boy Big Body Foreign got you, okay?